Hey everybody, this is Heather Carlucci, medium and medical intuitive. Today's video, as I posted, is about grieving. And I brought up grieving as an important part. I know I usually go through body part. And then last week, I did a really quick, I gotta get to the video camera really fast after seeing a talk with Brene Brown and DeRay McKesson about sitting at the table and talking about race. And I wanted to do that really quickly. I should have planned more, but I wanted it out there because I knew the video was not going to be up very long. The Riverside Church, where the event was planned, was going to take it down. And during that time, it occurred to me that one of the other things that I read quite often, and this is why I do the videos, if something comes up consistently, like once was the sphenoid bone, another one was the kidneys, because of course, in being a light worker and talking to spirits and being able to sort of bring people through for people, I do deal a lot and read through a lot of grief. Grief being the emotional and physical reaction, in our definition, after somebody passes or there's an ending. So, I think largely it is one of like 4 main reasons why people come to see light workers and somebody like myself. And really, people come to find me very often soon after a loved one has passed. And I walk through that very carefully. I walk through all grief very carefully. And very often it'll come up in different ways. But in the immediate, if it's a really, I've been contacted the day before, or the day after rather. I've been contacted the day of. I've even recently been contacted, the day before, and with the understanding that maybe this person could understand what's about to happen to the loved one passing, somebody quite ill. There's only so much we can read and only so much that we know. I'm careful in the newly grieving, and as in like it happens in the immediate, just so much as to say, even before a reading, a full session, what I will do is I'll answer some questions. I'll tell you what I can see, and let's take some time before as you begin to understand really what's happening in your my tendency to say recovery, it's not recovery, just as you move through it. Because grieving isn't something that you really end up moving through. It's sort of something you stay in and you adjust. I know there are supposed to be stages of grief, but the one thing I think that we don't give ourselves very much room for is the fact that everybody grieves and everybody's grieving is differently. There's no, well, you should have been over it. And there's really no, well, get over it. How we move through death, especially in the world now, is very up for grabs. So many other world cultures in time have had amazing rites and rituals that go way beyond just a funeral and given time, and then that's it. It is a marking of points in your life, death is, and the beginning of grieving is just the start of a different point. It reads physically as another, almost like a growth spurt, if you will. Many years ago, I was watching TV and they were talking about a tribe in Papua New Guinea who would preserve the bones of their loved ones, like your parents, and then they would every, I think, few years, they would dig out the bones as they were preserved, and they would clean them off, and they would talk to their ancestors, their parents, whoever it was, And it was so beautiful. They were talking to a man who was in fact doing this right then. And he was just saying how he felt like he could care for his parents the way they cared for him, and still have that sort of sense of communication. And I think I must have seen this in my teens or early 20s, and I was just so taken with the fact that there was still this connection. It wasn't this, you know what, somebody's gone and it's time for you to move on with your life. Because, like I said, we wear grieving in the body as we wear it. It looks very often like a blanket. And that's if time goes by. When it's new, really no matter who it is and who's lost who, how much in denial we may say somebody is. And denial is, an iffy word at best. It's completely subjective, because you don't know what somebody does inside themselves, and you don't know what somebody does behind closed doors. But in first, it always looks like an opened wound in my readings, and then it looks like a blanket. Very often that blanket will be like a wrapped up, balled up blanket somewhere in the body. And in many readings, it will not be the main source of why they came, but they will say to me, I will say, by any chance, was there any grieving going on? They're like, no, the only person I know, my aunt, we were very close. It was 10 years ago. I'm like, the grieving hasn't ended. The grieving still goes on. The anger can happen 10 years out. The pain and sense of loneliness, the shock can happen way after anything that we need to go through. The fact that we have no grasp with that right now is one of the big problems, and it's beginning to truly affect the health of people. That's what I've been reading a lot of right now, because we can't grasp that change, and we can't grasp the fact that it's not just something that happens and it's over. It's part of your time here as a human being. It's part of how we learn to love. It's part of how we deal with people. And it's really part of our impermanence here. So, of course, that right there really hits like the nervous system. I've seen everywhere, everything in the immediate, a lot of sore joints, a lot of sore throat, a lot of headache, the sense of not being able to move through things. There is also in the moments of the deep grieving, which can really happen, that what's really fascinating to me is there is, and we've all seen it, it's the sense of people needing to be alone. And as it reads, it goes beyond privacy. And it's particularly in, I think, more in this society, because we don't allow much for just sitting there and grieving and feeling the pain and sulking. Like you see it in animals. They allow themselves a lot of time. They feel it physically. They know the energy shifts, and we run past it. But that feeling of privacy that I read in somebody can go, and I think dangerously, into anonymity. And when I realized what that was, it was really mind-blowing. I mean, the idea of making yourself anonymous and taking yourself out of your community. The fact is that you're really supposed to be, grieving is a communal need. Moving through things is a communal need, and we've taken that away from us. I'm talking Western culture, America right now. We still keep some things. Sitting Shiva is a course of time. You know, a memorial post-funeral is a sense of time, but there are bigger things that need to sort of be honored. And we're not doing that, and we're cutting it off, and it creates more of not just a sense of I'm going into a depression and your community understands and lets you ride through it, but we're trying to sort of like fix it. That's where the health things are coming in. Sort of grief like asthma saturated grief or grief saturated asthma, I see a lot. I ask when the problem with breathing started. It is very often when I see it in that blanket kind of way, coming right from at the point where somebody is lost. Interestingly, I see it a lot less in people who have walked through the dying process of somebody who's been ill and who has needed to let go, because there's an understanding about where that person needed to go. It makes sense. Also, remember, when we have these times and somebody is leaving us and in the hospital and being taken care of, we have people around us. And it might be hospital workers, and it might be doctors, and it may be all the people you wish you never met in some way. But it can also be support groups and things like that. And we bring the community to those people. And very often during those times of specific diseases, it's almost like if we can put a name on it, we're okay with it. But if we can't, these people fall into the anonymity level of loneliness. The people who are left to mourn understand what happened. They understand also the need for release. They need it. They know that it's sort of needed to go. And the wear and tear of the mourning is still there. But the understanding brings a certain sense of support and sense of self that we really lose during any kind of mourning. You know, it could be somebody you haven't seen in a long time, or not even a spouse, but sense of self is shifted. That gets read very, very well, because you as a person, somebody from your past of fiber, or just where your head lays when you think of memories, has been jolted. And that has been a huge part, and also a huge part of the depression that can come in the mourning process and in the grieving process. You know, one story that I always think is really interesting, and it's about people who pass one after the other. Many years ago, well, not too many, about 10 years ago, my great aunt was quite ill, and we sort of foresaw the coming of her passing. And at the same time, my grandmother, who was never ill, fell quite ill. Two women hadn't been in the same room for many years, but they spoke every day. They were very close, and we were very close with my great aunt as well. I had owned a restaurant at the time, and one of the women who worked for me, who was African American and very entrenched in her culture, and we talked. She always brought a lot to the table as far as anything to do with rights and procedure in the home, and I wouldn't even, you know, religion beyond, you know, what we knew as church, sort of like our self-religion, the religion we come to the table with through our family, and, you know, just customs in general. And she said to me when my great aunt passed, and she said, I came in and, you know, she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No, you know, my aunt had passed." And she said, "And how's your grandmother doing?" Who was her sister. And I said, "She's not well either." And she said quite openly, Are you ready? Because one spirit will always take the other. And it was a really, it was one of those moments where I wasn't upset. I think I have an understanding of passing, although, you know, I was not, you know, close to anybody like I was my grandmother. She was my grandmother, and my aunt, of course. And, you know, these people also held the same position for my mother and other people in my family. So you know that the pain isn't just with you, but the pain is also in your loved ones. And I just looked at her and I said, yes. And she said, that is the African belief in many tribes, that when one passes, someone calls for the other. And I said to her, you know what, I'm going to stick with that, because my whole life I've noticed one death after the other, and how the grieving sets in for not one, but for two people, and how we wear that. It doesn't have to be the next day. My grandmother ended up passing, I believe, within the next, like, maybe 5 weeks, and maybe not even. And she was the first to say, as she went, that she knew she was going, she wanted to go, and that she was heartbroken because her sister had passed. But I think about that a lot, the energy of one after the other, and how we, and how that goes, and how we sort of collectively need to move out of the way for the new. And then where that again sits in the body. A lot of times in the grieving process, there's always throat and heart issues. People who largely, it's not that they can't always deal with the death, but they don't always have the support that they need. You know, we're talking fear-based, and you know, a couple of videos ago, I talked a lot about the kidneys. I sit up when I see the kidneys because I always put my hands in the back. And how we hold that fear. It's interesting, but I never really thought about it. It's very separate. But the fear that comes through the kidneys is not fear of death, usually. Fear of death is always shows up for me. And I want to make that clear that it's for me, because I don't know what other light workers, how they read things, but always in the throat, because people cannot speak and be open with their feelings, or they don't know what the feelings are and they cannot release them. And also is where the air comes in and out of. So we have this sort of fear of dying and fear of what's holding us back. And you get sore throats are rampant. And the last 3 or 4 people that I sort of picked up in grieving, and I sort of noticed the connection, is the fact that when they sat down, and many of you have had readings with me know that I tend to take on the physical pains of the person that I'm reading. I got a sore throat as soon as I felt the soreness in my throat as soon as they sat down. And the first time, it did not hit the grieving button that fast. I didn't ask about it. And then by the second one, I was like, that's what it was in the last one. As I read a little bit more, I could tell very strongly that it was a grieving moment. And that how we sort of adjust our bodies to prepare ourselves for this grieving. Anyway, for grieving, I'm going to sort of say, I might have to do it again, or at least answer questions on another one, because I'm getting all these messages, these private messages on the side of my screen. And somebody, I know this is sort of a work moment for most people, but that they do have questions and they are sort of lining up. And I may do one of just answering questions for this. My story for today having to do with the psychicness, more people are popping up. Hey, Scott. Post-grieving, a little bit lighter note. Had a very interesting reading not long ago. And at the end, I always ask, do you have any questions at the end? I'm usually pretty open at that point and can even answer questions that I'm not really picking up in the course of the day, of the reading. And a woman said, well, could you just read my dog? And I have never read a dog before. I don't think I can. And she really was, you know, she looked concerned. She said, it's a new dog. And, you know, he looks at me like he's annoyed all the time. And it's like, I said, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I'm just not that person. But, you know, wait a minute. And I said, out of nowhere, I could read this dog very easily, you know, in the midst of my saying, and then as soon as I said no, whatever it was, the spirit sort of let me know. And I said, actually, he's really annoyed that he doesn't like where his food plate is, his food bowl is, and he wants it further to the left. And she was like, how did you know that? Every day, the bowl's a little bit bigger. It's a smaller dog. It's really a bowl for a bigger dog. And he wants it left. I just assumed that he kept taking his food because he wants it in the dining room with us. And I said, no, actually, it's aesthetic. And there you go. And there I could read dogs. So put that on my roster of people and things that I can read. It's much more, and in some ways I've read a few dogs at this point, and it's much more interesting to sort of see how the moment is conveyed, because they don't come with all the like baggage and stuff. It's all very open. To sort of tap into the energy of an animal, it's almost, there's no filter. So if anything's wrong, if someone's not feeling well, if they're kind of on the way out, it's very upfront. I never really tried to read an animal before that, quite honestly. But now that I sort of see how it works, it's just at a different vibration. I see Playa Hondas in the house, so I have my international sect here. Hi, everybody. Anyway, due to my odd timing and the fact that the grieving subject is so large, I'll probably come back next week and answer a lot of questions. I'm running on time, short on time, but I just saw something flash up from my inbox, and it was quite a long question about grieving. So I'm going to sort of sort through that. I'm going to sort of see where that goes as far as a topic. And I'm going to say goodbye to everybody, and thank you for tuning in for today, and to come back next week. Bye-bye.